It doesn't happen very often that you can look at a set of polling data and conclude with a fair degree of confidence that yes, these numbers are evidence that the arc of history bends toward justice, that the forces of good will always triumph over the forces of evil, and that the truth will always overcome lies, no matter how powerful and well-financed the liars happen to be. So what numbers did I see today that have left me in a mood of such uncharacteristically rosy optimism? Well, it's all because of a story from Jeffrey M. Jones at Gallup News, link in description, which carries the headline, Confidence in U.S. Institutions Down, Average at New Low. Dateline, Washington, D.C. Quote, Americans are less confident in major U.S. institutions than they were a year ago, with significant declines for 11 of the 16 institutions tested and no improvements for any. The largest declines in confidence are 11 percentage points for the Supreme Court, as reported in late June before the court issued controversial rulings on gun laws and abortions. And 15 points for the presidency, matching the 15-point drop in President Joe Biden's job approval rating since the last confidence survey in June 2021. And there is a lot of deliciousness in these numbers, but I want to start with the institution whose numbers have fallen the farthest, the fastest. An industry that currently enjoys a level of public confidence that is commensurate with that of heroin junkies, internet psychics, and serial child molesters. But I don't need to tell you who it is. You already know. That's why you're already laughing. Because of course it's the fake news media we're talking about. Now, these numbers are broken down in such a way that there are separate entries for television news and newspapers, which seems a bit weird, but I guess the actual distinction is between print media and broadcast media, or broadcast media not counting radio in any event. And it's too bad they don't have the numbers for radio. Those might be interesting to see. I would venture to say that radio news is probably more widely trusted at this stage, even with nearly all of the stations being owned by two corporate empires, than the TV news or the print media are. But anyway, the category they referred to as newspapers, it fared slightly better than television did, but it's still down 5 points since July of last year, from 21% to 16%. And our good friends, the fake news performance artists, they started out at 16, and they are also down 5, so they're at 11%, which is to say barely 1 out of 10 Americans has any expectation that they can watch television news and get an even-handed accounting of the events of the day. And you might be saying, wow, 11%, that's such a shockingly abysmal number. That has to be the bottom of the list, right? There can't be any other institution that the people trust even less than that, can there? Oh yes, little grasshopper, you bet your sweet ass there can be, and it is called Congress. Currently under the able and distinguished stewardship of Nancy Pelosi and crying Chuck Schumer. A year ago, the last time they did this survey, 12% of Americans said they had confidence in the Pelosi-Schumer Congress. Today, that number is 7%, and I think even Gary Glitter has a higher approval rating than that. I mean, sure, Chuck and Nancy never molested any Vietnamese middle school girls that we know of, but they also never wrote any hit singles in the 70s. So I want you to think about that while Jim Eagle hits the damn music. From high atop the battlements of Castle Curmudgeon, where we have got an opening in the house band if you happen to know any good lute players. Good evening, Mr. and Mrs. America and all ships at sea. Welcome to the program. I am your eponymous host and humble servant. And I guess I'm going to be violating one of my core editorial policies here if I spend the whole episode parsing poll numbers, but some of these Gallup numbers are so striking, I rather think it warrants a one-time exception to the policy. And you have to admit, it does provide a fun excuse to throw shade at some of the people we revile the most, which we should never show any reticence about doing, because they slander us constantly, and we are the ones who don't have all the money and the power. Which raises an interesting question. Now, when your approval numbers are in the single digits or the very, very low double digits, how can you even pretend to wield any sort of moral authority? The short answer is you can't. And when you've got 90% or more of the population against you, You can go ahead and assume you did a whole hell of a lot to earn that. That shit doesn't happen overnight. You have to work long and hard, nose to the grindstone, to achieve single-digit public confidence numbers. You have to do your job very badly for an extremely long period of time, bearing in mind that for roughly half the population, they are aligned with you politically, and they share your goals and your values. And amazingly, you've even managed to alienate most of them. And here, just to put an extra point on it, just for an extra dose of perspective, if you added together the public confidence numbers for Congress and the TV news, you would still wind up short of 20%. And you might be wondering, between last year and today, which institution was it that saw its public confidence number crash by the widest margin? Which institution lost public approval at a rate 3 times greater than Congress and the fake news? The answer to that question is, well, of course, the presidency. President and semi-animated cadaver Joe Biden was, 5 months into his term the last time they did this survey? And last year, the presidency got a 38% score for public confidence. Today, 12 months later, 23%. 23. One man did that in 1 year. To put it a different way, 40% of the people who said they had confidence in the presidency in July of 2021 had their minds changed between then and now. And if you're wondering why so many of the people who worked so hard to install Joe Biden in the presidency are now all stampeding over one another to be the one who gets to throw him under the bus, numbers like this are why. Every single thing in Washington, D.C. is driven by focus groups and poll numbers. And the people who crunch these numbers for a living and formulate a party's political messaging accordingly, there are other numbers that they pay a lot more attention to than the normal presidential approval rating that you hear on the news all the time. And there's a crucial distinction there. Because the president's normal approval numbers, that's a number where you're asking people how well they think this particular guy is discharging his professional duties. In other words, the thing that's being measured is a person and not an institution. But the question in this Gallup poll, it doesn't contain any mention of the name of the current occupant of 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue. The question is, how do you feel about the presidency itself? And Joe Biden has been such an epoch-shatteringly inept president that he's caused public confidence in the institution of the presidency itself to be cut nearly in half. And let's just take a moment to stand back in awestruck wonderment at the majesty of this achievement by Joe Biden. He told us he was going to be an historical president, ladies and gentlemen, and he was not wrong. There are only 2 institutions on the list where a majority of Americans report their continued confidence. In a majority, number 1 is small business, number 2 is the military. And you may not be surprised to hear that the military's number dropped 5 points, 69 to 64%. So I guess let's salute Mark Milley and Lloyd Austin and all the woke generals for a job well done. I mean, sure, we can't meet any of our recruiting targets. We've turned the Department of Defense into a clown show of gender pronouns and maternity flight suits and Marines with 2 mommies, where military force readiness takes a backseat to affirming alternative sexual lifestyles, where graduating officer candidate school means being handed a required reading list of books by Robin DiAngelo and Henry Rogers. Sorry, Dr. Ibram X. Kendi. But we can all sleep soundly at night, knowing that if a foreign invader attempts to ingress our frontiers, that invader will be met and thrown back into the sea by an army of overweight, heavily medicated, genderqueer social anxiety sufferers with purple hair and neck tattoos. Because victory on the field of battle amounts to nothing if your fighting force is not sufficiently intersectional. So if China tries to come at us with an army of Chinamen, we will defeat them by diversity alone, for diversity is our strength. And Mark Milley, he still wants to understand white rage. There's a rumor that he may take an extended leave of absence soon, hike up to the top of a mountain in the Himalayas to an ashram where there lives a guru who he heard might be able to help him understand white rage. The answer that keeps eluding him despite his having read every single book on Amazon's official white guilt reading list. The police They're down 6 points in this survey. Organized religion also down 6. The healthcare system down 6. The banks down 6. The criminal justice system down 6. There are 16 institutions on the list. There is only one whose number did not go down since July last, that being organized labor, which held steady at 26%. The Supreme Court, down 11, 36 to 25, and that's a bit of a head-scratcher, I think. I don't know that you can boil that one down to one factor, or two, or maybe even three. I can picture people on the right saying, yeah, I have less confidence because in the court now because we just swore in a justice who says she can't tell the difference between men and women. And I can just as easily picture people on the left saying, well, I have less confidence in the court because Roe v. Wade is the gold standard of American jurisprudence and abortion on demand is the most precious civil right that a person can enjoy. So if I lost the thing I like, then obviously the Supreme Court is a disaster. Because my entire personal judicial philosophy consists of more abortion good, less abortion bad. Public schools, they're down 4, 32 to 28. And that number seems weirdly small from where I'm sitting. Could any institution possibly do more to erode the level of public trust it enjoys with the citizenry than the public schools have done these last couple of years? In fact, let's take a quick look at the scoreboard. First, they shut all the schools down. There was never any compelling public health rationale for doing that. There were no scientific data that demanded that course of action. But the big teacher unions demanded it. And it was so. Now, depending on what state you are cursed to live in, the schools wound up being shut down for between a year and a half and 2 years. Millions of kids were permanently damaged. In some cases, the damage was academic. In other cases, emotional. In some cases, both. And now we have an epidemic of teen suicide to show for it. So isn't that fun? Your kids were made to log into some Zoom meetings that they called school. But it wasn't school, and everybody damn well knows it wasn't school. Why was it done? Because the big teacher unions decided that their members really enjoyed being able to get full pay and benefits for laying around in their jammies all day pretending to work. What, you thought the purpose of the public school system was educating your kids? Oh, that is so preciously naive of you. No, in fact, the public school system exists to make sure that the union leaders, those horrible, execrable, sleazy, loathsome creatures like Randy Weingarten have plenty of money and power. And so that the maximal amount of the union dues that get garnished from the teachers' paychecks finds its way into the Democrat Party's campaign coffers where it belongs. Well, that's the main reason why public schools exist. The secondary purpose, of course, is for sex pervert teachers to trans your kids and to seek their affirmation. You can go on TikTok right now, though I don't recommend it if you're not into Chinese government spyware. And you can spend the entire rest of your natural-born life watching videos from jello-haired, face-pierced, genderqueer school teachers talking as if the whole point of their profession, the whole point of their workday, is talking to little kids about gender politics and non-normative sexuality. In the minds of these psychopaths, the teacher isn't there to educate the kids. The kids are there to make the teacher feel happy feelings. The reason you bundle your kids off to school each morning, the reason you pay all those property taxes, and you never got a rebate when the schools were shut down for over a year, did you? The reason we have a public education system at all is so that sex pervert teachers can feel less guilty about being sex perverts. So sure, you might be left with a functionally illiterate high school graduate who has nothing resembling any employable skills. But do you have to be so selfish? The affirmation that your kid's sex pervert teachers received from your kid, that is far more important than knowing about history or the Constitution or how to do basic arithmetic. Because those teachers are now more comfortable living as their true selves and indulging every animalistic sexual desire that happens to strike their fancy and dyeing their hair the color of any jello flavor they feel like. And isn't that what really matters? Big Tech, they also had a surprisingly modest drop-off in their approval numbers, though they were only at 29% going in and they fell to 26%. But I can't help wondering how much that number might go down if they changed that descriptor from large technology companies to social media platforms. It's still the same question, after all, since every major social media platform, Truth Social notwithstanding, is owned and operated by big tech. I got into a bit of an argument with a coworker recently, as hard as I try to avoid such things, where he was attempting to take the position that there was nothing corrupt or untoward about the government response to the Kung Flu virus, that what we saw was just a series of well-intentioned mistakes and overreactions by people whose motives were perfectly noble, who were animated solely by a genuine desire to ameliorate the spread of the virus and promote the interests of public health. I didn't want to engage. Normally when people bring up politics in the workplace, I try to just nod politely and bite my lip until they finish and go away, because there's never anything to gain. But this time, just for a moment, I decided to engage. I said, who reaped the biggest financial windfall from people being told to lock down and remain in their homes indefinitely? And the answer to that question, obviously, is Jeff Bezos, already the world's richest man, who owns the company whose bread and butter is delivering items to people's homes. And here's the other question I asked. Who stands to gain the biggest benefit from the federal and state governments coercing people into being injected with an experimental drug, irrespective of whether they want or need it? The answer to that question, just as plainly, is the pharmaceutical industry. So, if you're sitting there in March of 2020 and your whole objective is, how can I use this Chinese flu virus to make sure that the richest, most powerful people in the world get even richer and more powerful, wouldn't you do the exact same series of things that were done in the actual event? Yes, of course you would. And if there's an improbable component of this story, it's the fact that there are still some people who are willing to place their trust in bodies and institutions and organizations that are so obviously driven by corruption and cynical self-interest. The 11% of us who are happy to click on CNN or MSNBC and believe whatever they hear, the 7% of us who think Nancy Pelosi and crying Chuck Schumer are selfless public servants who have the best interests of the American people at heart, the 16% who think the New York Times and the Washington Post are publications that concern themselves with abiding by the basic precepts of journalism. The good news is, most of us have been shaken from our stupor. We've developed the ability to know when we are being obviously lied to, but there still are some holdouts who require our assistance in overcoming their too trusting nature. So I say, let's give it to them. If they're the ones who bring up the topic, as my unnamed coworker did, there's nothing rude about politely telling them they're wrong. And you don't even have to go that far, really. You can take the same approach I took. Just ask a couple of probative, open-ended questions and send them on their way to consider the answers for themselves. And though it is difficult sometimes, we shouldn't be disheartened. The edifice of lies and corruption, it is actively crumbling. The numbers back it up. The good guys are winning. Truth, reason, and basic human decency are gaining the ascendancy, and these are good things. Far from being on the precipice of ruin, I would submit it's just as likely that we're standing at the threshold of a new American golden age. And I guess if I wanted to maximize my view count, I would sit here clutching my pearls about how we're on the brink of a civil war like Tim Pool does, but I don't think that. I actually have a deep and abiding faith in the greatness of our system and in the goodness of our people. They have seen us through the last 233 years, and I think there is no good reason to assume they won't see us through another 233 more. And we will leave it there for tonight. Thank you very much indeed for watching. No Friday episode this week. I have a work function I need to attend, but do stay tuned for a possible Saturday special. Until then, have a pleasant tomorrow. Do not comply. Get off my lawn.